Our speaker today is Marc Chevalier. He is a PhD and he's a startup program manager in the tech transfer office of the Institut Pasteur in Paris. He's a doctor of neuroscience. He pursued his career alternating scientific positions and entrepreneurship while being strongly involved in associative projects aiming to facilitate networking and the professional evolution of PhDs in the private sector or outside academia. He joined Institut Pasteur in 2018 as a scientific career advisor to provide career guidance to PhD students and postdocs at the Institute before moving to the direction of innovation to deploy the startup program he contributed to build. So now Marc will soon start the presentation, and please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window here in Zoom. I will ask some of the questions as we go. And then in the end of the presentation, I will also enable participants to speak. So then you can also ask the question by means of voice if you prefer. So Marc, the floor is yours, and I will monitor the questions in the chat.
Great. Well, thank you, Pavlo. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and to have so many people actually interested by this webinar. I will first introduce myself and because I think this is really important for you to better know how I got there and how in some ways it could also guide you for the future and how you can find also some ways to go a little bit deeper in the world of innovation. I really got interested by this ecosystem. Going through different experiences and going through different people who were deeply involved in that. So very quickly on my path, usually this is what I say in 30 seconds, but here I wanted to insist a little bit more on some steps. So I've got a background in neuroscience. I got a PhD in Bordeaux in 2007, and then I went for a postdoc in the United States, and then go back in France, went through another postdoc and teaching, and then I went through entrepreneurship, and so I participated to create 3 different startups, which most of them were devoted to provide some services for entrepreneurs or research scientists. And so, and then I went back to a postdoc position, which is not so common. When you leave academia, you hear that it's not possible to go back in academic lab. And so, but for me, this was the right transition before going back to more applied position and more dedicated to innovation. And so during my postdoc, during this postdoc, I was recruited as a project manager in an economic agency, which provides some services for people to create a startup. And so I was at the same time at the lab going for experiments, and at the same time, I was providing some guidance for people who were willing to create their own company. And so at this period of time, I also went through the creation of the School of Neuroscience, which is based in Bordeaux. And I was project manager for the school, which was created by Christophe Mull, a famous neuroscientist there. And then I went full-time on the Economic Development Agency. And during this experience, I created a network that was based on technology of education, which is called EdTech, which was like a regional cluster, which groups different companies and different actors which were willing to develop the economy of the technologies for education. Either for people going through different steps of school, but also for universities. And then I got recruited at the Institut Pasteur in 2018, first as a career advisor to guide PhD students and postdocs to find their way to get a career after their PhD position or postdoc position at the institute. And then now I moved in the innovation department, in which I'm responsible for helping scientists to create their own startup based on the research they have, on the research results they have from the lab. And so just below the timeline, I just put the different associative activities I had during this whole period, because I couldn't have been through this, this path without these volunteering experiences. Because right at the beginning of my PhD, I got involved in the PhD Student Association of Bordeaux, and which was connected to a national network of PhD Student Association. And then this is how I discovered the different possibilities that were offered to PhD students to be connected to different companies and the ecosystem of innovation. And at this period of time, we decided as well to create an association that was devoted to help PhD students from different disciplines. And at this period of time, it was not so common to mix all the disciplines together. And this is an association that still exists today. And then I contributed to create a national association for PhDs, for them to develop their network, especially for people who were in mobility, like people from the Marie Curie Association. And then I got interested by entrepreneurship, even though during my PhD program, we were also deeply trained to discover a little bit more the world of startups and how you could create a company. But then I also contributed to these several networks that would promote entrepreneurship, either at the regional level or national level. And so this is how I got into this topic of ecosystem of innovation. And at the same time, I was trying to continue all the different tools that I've been developing for career development. And this is how I got a little bit deeper also in all the facilitation processes in which you just try to help people to reach their goals. And so this is through a mentorship program I created in Bordeaux that I was recruited by the Institut Pasteur to develop networking also for PhD students here, and to allow them to be connected a little bit deeper a little bit closer with different entrepreneurs, but also professionals from the private sector, for them to better visualize what they could do after a PhD. And so during this, while I was at the Institut Pasteur, I also contributed to create now a national network for the career development of PhDs. And so we grouped together something like 20 different universities in France, in which professionals of career guidance are grouped together to try to share the different tools they can promote and to other universities, and to try to develop new tools to better guide PhD students for the future. So all this seems very different, you know, if you take all these elements separately. But this is thanks to all these experiences that now I try to give the best for people who want to create their companies, but also to help PhD students who want to better design their career development for the future. Oops, excuse me. So usually when you talk about innovation ecosystems, usually you talk about the environment around companies or a group of companies that work together to build something that could be consistent for the consumer. And so when I was giving some courses about companies and economic development, it was mostly about describing all the different actors that could contribute to build economy. And so in the definition of innovation ecosystem that now we have, it's much more based on a process in which all different actors can contribute all together to create something that could be valuable for the customer. And so at the level of what we call now in France deep tech, so technologies that comes from the lab and that can be that can lead to the creation of a company. Usually you go first from research discoveries at the lab, what you can produce at the bench, and then from that you can develop, you can invent something and discover something that could be valuable. And this is just after a few years and some steps that are really important, and that groups all together, prematuration and maturation together. That's then you can talk about innovation and something that could be valuable for the customer or the patient when you talk about health. And so after that, you have a period of development that is related to developing the market most of the time, and then you go to the market, and then you try to scale up and to continue to develop the company. So this is the kind of scheme that we present, that we introduce to different scientists, because most of the time when you are trained at the university and when you are trained as a PhD student, most of the time you are very aware of everything that goes in the lab and which is related to, that could lead to research discoveries, but less aware of everything that is after the lab, and which is also related to different positions that you could get, since you were trained really at the beginning of all this process. So then you can still learn and go through the same steps that a project can go through to develop. So as I said, feel free to ask some questions if there are some things that are not clear in what I introduce, and if you have some also personal questions, Pablo will probably read your questions through the chat. So this is a scheme that you can find also on the internet. I put the source on the slide, and this is generally what is seen when you go from research to the market. And so these are the different actors that I put together in the different slides I will introduce later, because in each of these entities and organizations, you can find jobs that can be adapted to PhD students and people who have a scientific oriented mindset at the beginning, and that can develop then a business oriented mindset while growing and evolving throughout their career. So first, I want to underline that you don't have to be an entrepreneur to dive into the innovation ecosystem, because most of the time people who get some interest in startups, you think that they have to be interested in creating a startup. But what we try to promote today is that the entrepreneurship journey is something in which you can develop some skills and in which you can discover a lot the different actors in the ecosystem of innovation. And this is not reserved for people who want to create their company. It should be something that is just a way for you to get more information about who is doing what in outside academia, and the different places that you can go through after your PhD, and where you could apply. So as said, this is the scheme that I tried to redesign a bit, just adapted to the different presentation I make here at Untitled Chapter to present the different steps that are important for a project to grow. But here we'll try to make the focus on what kind of job you can target or get after your PhD. So as said, you go from research to the startup creation or the scale-up, which is just, as said, an illustration of the ecosystem of innovation. And then I put under the different actors, big families of actors that are important. Of course, I introduced some French actors because I'm from France and I know pretty well the ecosystem here in France. But most of the actors you will see there, you can find some equivalent of that may have a different name in most of the countries in Europe and also in United States. So research institutions are really important from the research to the maturation. So every step before creating company. So there, this is something, an environment that most of you know, but most of you know just one part, the part that is really related to science and related to the production of science, actually. Not much, often you don't know much about everything that could be related to tech transfer. So now in France, there's also some entities that are devoted to take in charge this tech transfer tasks. Or you can find some TTOs, which are the tech transfer offices, either in the research institutions or as in France, in separate organizations that can be devoted to that. And then during this pre-maturation, after the lab, let's say, and the first step in the lab, you can find some incubators or accelerators, depending on the countries, that can help entrepreneurs or scientists to develop their project, to test the ability of the project to reach the market, and then to have enough arguments then to decide if the project itself is enough promising to develop a specific market or not, and then if it can lead to a startup creation. Accelerator, most of the time, are acting at the end of this process, just before the transition from startup to scale up. But as said, it really depends of the countries, and the vocabulary could be different depending on the places and depending on the actors that are involved. In this timeline, you also find a lot of consultants or innovation consulting firms, which are really important to help people who come from the lab most of the time and who need some more information about the market and about the environment and how something that is really innovative from a scientific point of view could be also promising in terms of business point of view. And that's really important because it's, as most of you know, it's two different worlds that meet together, and it's really important to have some specialists, either coming from science, but also coming from business. And so these organizations or people help to make this match. During this whole period, there are some actors that are really important, which are constituted by other startups or companies, which can collaborate to develop the scientific project, to help the maturation. And there's a whole ecosystem of companies that can help this scientific project to transition from academic labs towards enterprise startups. So at the same time, you have a lot of different actors that help to reach the market, and most of the time you see them as structures that have a lot of business developers or a lot of commercial representatives, and can help really to reach the clients when you have the product developed. And so at the first place, this is not actors that you may think about, but at the end, when you consider that a company needs to sell, they are often very important because it could be very costly for a young startup to develop the same network of commercial representatives that other actors may already have developed. And then you also have these development agencies and clusters, the different entities I talked to you about, because I've been working for some of them, which most of the time are developing like a public politic to develop the economy locally, and can help startups or companies to grow or to settle related to either the government or regions or cities that may develop specific tools for companies to develop locally. And so in all this, you have national and European public funding, which can help to fund different steps of the project itself, and in which you find a lot of people that may require a scientific-oriented mindset to better understand the development of science, and also some people that are more business-oriented to also understand if the science can go to the market. You have institutional actors which define the different rules and laws that could be associated to that, and that acts from research to different companies steps. And then something I won't talk too much about today, it's much more about private funding. So most of the time when you want to create a company, you need some money because you don't have, you may not have enough money to support the first steps of development. And so you can find some individual actors like business angels who may give their own money to help you to start, but also some firms that can invest a lot more, like venture capitalists, and then private equity firms and corporate funds that can also help you to find much more funds for the different rounds of funding you may require for the project. But as said, today it's not too much a matter of describing what these different actors are doing. It's much more trying to focus on the different positions you can find as a PhD in these different big families of actors. So let's start by the beginning. So which research institutions and TTOs, sometimes they are in the same entities and sometimes they are separated, like in France. Most of now TTOs are incorporated in what they call Société d'Accélération de Transfert Technologique, SAT, which are companies which exclusively develop the patents and so licensing or creation of startup based on research for universities. And so in these big families, you have universities that you know, and so of course you could continue your career as a researcher, either like you're doing now as a PhD student or a postdoc, but also later you can stay in academia and continue research as a researcher, as a permanent researcher. But also you may find a lot, and we will find this term a lot of time in the presentation. You can find a lot of positions that are related to program manager, in which you can contribute to develop a specific topic in science. And most of the time, these are temporary positions in which you focus either on developing a program that is funded by Europe or a national program, etc., or something that is related to promoting a specific topic in science for the university or the institute. Now there is also positions like grant manager that have been developed a lot recently to help researchers and to help people in the lab to write the different grant applications and also to find more details to help them to apply better, but also to watch online what could be consistent for researchers to apply for. And these positions are becoming more and more strategic because it helps the researcher to better apply and to increase the chances to get a grant for each researcher in the institution. And so for big universities and institute, now it's very important to have these people in support of the researcher. In this line, you have a lot of different entities that are related to developing the entrepreneurship awareness. Especially in France, we have a specific program that is called PEPIT, and which is promoting students to create a company while they are a student, and the government developed a specific program for students to go for internship in their own company. And in these different programs for awareness, you have a lot of program managers that have been recruited and who are PhDs, because with now the strategy of the government to invest more on the innovation that are coming out from the lab, they know that PhD are well suited to understand what kind of innovation could develop and to understand the science and to help researchers. Then they know to create a company. And so you have some educators, you have some business manager, consultant, facilitators. Really depends on the definition they give, depending on the organization that recruits. But you have a lot of different people which mission is first to make people understand what is entrepreneurship and what are the different steps, and then also to connect entrepreneurs to a lot of different people who can help them either in financing their project, either in because they need mentors, or because they need to have a better knowledge of the market, etc. So most of the time it's a position in which you are responsible for understanding the project and then connecting to specialists for the project to roll properly. So you have some scientists and some people who have a PhD experience who are now patent engineer, for instance, and everything that could be related to patents. At this stage, usually it requires an additional training for you to have this kind of position. But this is a position in which you can have the mix of science and also application, and to really look at what kind of science could support a patent, and so what could be really innovative in the definition of the law concerning patent application. And so you have people also who are more related to creativity or business development, who are also related to this requirement for patents, either before or after filing a patent. And so in tech transfer offices, TTOs, you have several roles that now belong also to PhDs. So first you have some research engineers or researchers, depending on the role you can have, but people who are recruited most of the time for a short period of time just to check if the research coming out from the lab and could have been enough developed to file a patent, if this innovation could be developed a little bit more to evaluate the ability to create a startup, or to give more arguments for licensing of this patent towards another company. And so these people most of the time are in charge to develop a program that is based on a short-term basis, just to see if it's worth to invest a little bit more on the development of this technology. And then you have also program manager, which could have the role to develop different programs, and most of the times it's related to networking. But also business manager who are in charge to develop the business, and so to connect the different research application to the different companies that may be requiring these new innovations, but also some startup manager, depending if they have the connection with the incubator, etc. And you can have also some consultancy role, because most of the time in these TTOs, you don't find specialists in terms of science, but they may require some expert point of view sometimes when they want to develop a project. So when you go a little bit closer to the startup creation, you can find some, as said, some incubators or accelerators. So these organizations are in role, have the role to host the entrepreneur and to help the project to grow, either before creating the company or just after creating the company. But most of the time, they are the first economic actor entrepreneurs can find, especially concerning deep tech, the technologies that are coming from the lab. And so it's really, these actors are coming really in the first steps of development. And in that, you can find either some business-oriented profile in this organization, or really scientific-oriented profile. And this is where, really depending on your experience, you can also find some position. I just put some incubators that you can find in Paris, but I could have listed some other incubators also in France and in Europe we are working with. And then it really depends on how they are working and what kind of profile they could look for. And of course, depending on your specialty in science, you may apply differently to different incubators or accelerators that you can find. So accelerators usually have a role that is more market-oriented and really with a definition that is more related to the development of the startup, but you can find almost the same kind of position. Now there's new organizations that are working a little bit differently, which are startup studios, and some of them gather PhD scientists and people with a more business-oriented mindset to build a team, and then this team they try to match this team with a scientific project they could develop. And so you can have some cohorts of people that are recruited all together, and in which they try to find how you could match one with another, because what we know now from several years going through startup creation is that the team is really key when you create. And it's really important to have people who are able to work together and who can bring each different skills that are complementary to others. And so I put some of them, and we had, for instance, Monaco Foundry for a webinar that we're organizing with the PhD Student Association and postdocs from Pasteur. and there you can then find several roles that you could also find when you want to contribute to the creation of a startup. So co-founder is like a general definition just to show that you were at the origin of the project, but it doesn't mean that you have a specific role. But then you have the different known roles as CEO, CTO, CSO. So chief executive officer, technical officer, or scientific officer. So usually you may have one of these roles when you come from a scientific oriented mindset, even if most of the time the CEO is more business oriented. And then you can have some people who are business. So it's the CBO or finance, CFO, or business developer, or scientist, or all the different other position you can find in any other company. So this is something for some of you could also be interesting, even especially if you have innovative oriented mindset, because at least the change could be interesting for you to go through these different programs and to develop your skills to better understand what could be required for you after your PhD. So in these innovation consulting firms, you may be aware that there are some big actors and there are some smaller actors as well. And you can find a different, a wide range of opportunities in these different firms. Of course, you may be in competition with people who have like a business school experience, etc. But you can find some companies which are more innovation oriented and who require people who have scientific training, and most of the time they require people to have a PhD. Eventually, for people who are really interested by that, it could be necessary to go for a business school after your PhD, but it's not mandatory, especially if you are selected to go for group interviews with them. You will see that it's mostly based on your ability to be really innovation oriented more than the training that you could have had. So like as a consultant there, you can have very different roles, and you could go for strategy, it could go for business, it could go for innovation, in the definition that innovation is a little bit different than research. And so the different experiments or steps that are required to develop the innovation are really different from the steps that are required to develop research. And so all these consultants are helping the researchers and the different CTOs to structure the plan that could either go in the innovation process or to the financing process, or to the strategic process, or to the market access process, etc. So there, it's really a matter of better understanding what role you can have there. And as we will see in the conclusion of this webinar, it's really a matter of meeting these people and being able to talk with them about what they're doing on a daily basis. So startup and companies, so this is where most of you will probably first look for and apply for different positions. But then what you may not be aware of is the density of collaboration between these startups and companies with academic labs and to contribute to the development of innovation. So usually we can talk about public-private partnership, which is a key element in innovation development, because it may rely on the academic partner to structure a development partnership with some companies. And so there you can find all the different size and all the different types of companies in this ecosystem. And it can rely on research collaborations, which you may be aware of, but also some research contracts like material transfer agreements, in which, for instance, you may provide something for the company that you develop at the lab, but also licensing or outsourcing, which is different in the sense that licensing, the company may exploit a patent that you have developed in the academic lab. And outsourcing is more like a paid service that can provide to you if you need something specifically, or something they can pay for you for the service as well, because you can also provide them something that could be very useful. And this was a lot developed this last years with the platforms, scientific platforms that were settled in the different universities. So at each step, the business developers in these companies or partnership managers have a key role to play, and they are required to really understand deeply science because they need to understand how to negotiate in terms of science development and to design the type of collaboration they can build for the company. So it concerns, as said, all the different companies, and sometimes you are not so aware about CROs and CMOs, which are in health, at least, some organization that can really help scientists or other companies to develop either research or to manufacture some elements. And then, as you know, it's another source of funding for academic research, and it's also a way to develop partnership and collaboration between academic labs and companies. So here, this is the part that most of the time it's a little bit more difficult to access just after a PhD, except for some specific companies that develop their market in academic labs, especially those which are providing some material or consumables for academic labs. And so why it is often not so accessible for PhD just after their diploma or for postdocs? It's because it's much more requiring business skills, and most of the time it's not so important to know in details what science is about. The different commercial representative, for instance, for some companies, just need to really understand how the user, the end user, can use the product, and then if the user have a question about science, they can still go for questions towards the technical manager. And so there, except if you are already working with some companies which sells you the different consumables or material, you may find few roles that you can play in these companies. So development agencies and clusters are not so open for PhDs, but now since at least in France, the strategy is really to develop the research results as something that could be innovations. It becomes more and more important to have people who are really able to understand what you can get out from research and how you can transform that as an innovation. And so in these different organizations, now you can find people who have a PhD and who may have like 5 years to 10 years of experience, either in a big company or in a startup or as a consultant, etc. But and then most of the time it requires you to have some experience in business. If I go back to my own experience, for instance, I was recruited in this development agency because I had at the same time the scientific profile, and I had also been through entrepreneurship, and so I could put forward that I had a good knowledge of the university environment, but also the business environment. And so these positions may require you to gain more experience in the meantime in different environments that are more related to the market, to go back then to this position. But then it's really a matter of career development and how you can grow your career and which steps could be important for you to reach what you aim to do at the end. And so in France, there are some entities like Pôle de Compétitivité, which are regional thematic clusters in which now you find a lot of people who went through a PhD and are able to understand the market and now have the role as a program manager to develop the network between companies and different members of the Pôle de Compétitivité. And you can find in these environments also universities, institutes, and several public actors that help the companies to develop. Now the difference is less important between Pôle de Compétitivité and clusters. And so clusters, you find the same kind of definition, a group of companies which have a common goal and who share and which share networks to better develop. And so development agency most of the time are smaller and are devoted to provide network, of course, but most of the time some services also to help the companies to settle and to develop locally. So, and then in this whole timeline, you have different organizations to help you to fund research or maturation or companies. And in all these different organizations, you have people who have a very scientific mindset and who are able to analyze the different tools for funding. Of course, some may require you to also have a business school or something that can justify that you can understand the different financial aspects of development. But as said, for clusters, with 5 years experience or 10 years experience in a company, it may be enough for you to go to this position as well. In some research funding agencies, you can also find some positions that are open for junior applicants. And so you could apply directly after your PhD. So usually in this public funding, you talk about non-dilutive funding for companies, for instance, because these funding come to help the company, but the organization itself doesn't take shares and is not part of the company itself. And you have some new tools that especially developed for Europe, like the European Innovation Council, that helps to develop startups at the European level. And then in different institutions like ministries, like in regions, like in cities, you can also find some positions that are really policy oriented, and in which you can find some people who need to have a good understanding of what's going on in universities or in all this innovation development scheme to be able to talk to the different actors in all this on this journey and to be able to help people who vote for the different laws, for instance, to make their mind on a topic. And so you have these institutional actors that also develop some agencies, and in which, for instance, in France, you can find a lot in which you could have a role as a project manager to also contribute to develop the network. So I'm just checking the time. I think, yeah, it was just the right duration. So this is my conclusion slide, actually. As a reminder, I just tell you that you don't have to be an entrepreneur to get information about everything that is required to create a startup, because at the end, this is really something that in which you could develop skills and in which you could develop a network that could be really important for the future, especially since you have a lot of different positions that may be accessible for you right after the PhD or the postdoc, and which are easy to get when you have a scientific experience. But that requires that you need to show that you adopted an innovative mindset. Actually, we are working on that with the STAPA, the Association of PhD Students and Postdoc here in Pasteur, to develop like a website for people to better understand the different aspects in all this journey I introduced you to today. And we'll probably release that in a few weeks. And then if you want to contribute, you will be more than welcome, because at some point we will try to open this initiative to some other people. I have to say that you need to be curious, open-minded, and to meet people. I put like this hashtag lifelong learning because, well, I'm still a little bit concerned about EdTech, so the technologies of education. And I think this is really important because especially when you go through a PhD, it's most of the time because you want to learn and because you want to know how. And I think it's really important to keep this mindset all your life and to continue to learn, and not going through books, going through experiences, etc., but also through discussions and how you can learn from other people. Because you can gain a lot of information by hearing the different experiences of other people who went through this journey. Positions are everywhere. Most of the time when I was career advisor, I was saying, well, it's up to you. It's really up to you to make the right choice. You have a lot of options after a PhD, after a solid scientific background. But most of the time, these positions are hidden. That means that if you don't go and get them, then you won't be able to see them. So don't wait to apply for positions. Go for a position. Just go and talk to people you want to work with. So this was not very positive, but I want to underline also this, is that if you want to transition outside academia, most of the time, either you are whatever, if you are a PhD or you are a postdoc, it takes time. So at least it takes 6 months to get something that could be consistent. So try to be prepared to in advance, and so to spend these 6 months while you're still under contract during your PhD or postdoc, to prepare this transition properly. And so think about this transition way before the end of the contract, especially since to develop a network, it takes some time. So for people who know me, and I know that there are some here in the audience, the conclusion is pretty clear. It's just a matter of network. You need to network, but it's not like to have 5,000 contacts, but without knowing anyone and just going through virtual messages sometimes. it's really a matter of strategy and of doing it properly, and really be interested by what the other has to say to you, and to try to keep the contact with these people, and to be prepared to give a lot to your network, and maybe not to receive too much, but still, you know, this is how human relationships goes. It's really a matter of giving before receiving. It's okay for me, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Marc, for this insightful and interesting talk. So we have a few questions. So we have, we're not so limited by time, but if you prefer, if you guys prefer to leave when you need to leave, then this presentation will also be on YouTube later in our channel, in our playlist. But let's start with questions and go, let's see how much time it will take us. So Christina Rosa asks this following question. I would like to know if Marc knows or would recommend relevant or any particular actors in Spain.
In Spain, that's funny because we're working a lot with Spanish people actually in this group of PhD students and postdocs at Pasteur. I don't know that much. I know that it is very developed now because I've been working on some European projects in which we were working together with some Spanish actors and actors from Portugal. And they were very active and dynamic in developing economy and startups and tools to help the different companies to develop, especially in these technology fields. And so really depends then on the location you look for, and really depends also on the scientific field you want to work on. I know that, for instance, Biocat in Barcelona is very active, especially in Europe, and renowned if you're working in health, for instance. But then every region in Spain, at least, has developed agencies, yeah, what they call CEEI, which are very active in terms of economic development.
Thank you for the detailed answer, Marc. And then the next question is from Matthias Philippe. Marc, most positions that you mentioned are science, tech, and business oriented. And in the case of social science, journalism, communication. What do you see as a career path for those backgrounds?
Yeah. So it's always like I told you, we have like this national network of people who are guiding PhD students to grow in their career, and it's always a different story when you talk about these different disciplines. But at the same time, it really depends on, as I said, on your mindset. And I know someone, for instance, who had, I think, a PhD in geography, and who is now in a tech transfer office, and who is working in a position where it's more about business. And in all this social economy that is developing everywhere in Europe, you can find a lot of people who have a profile that is more in social science than in technology, because it requires people who are able to better understand the impacts on the environment and on people around. And so I would, in France, there's a debate if people with a PhD in social science have a competitive advantage compared to some other people who could get the same positions. And I think yes, because but you need to promote really the quality of the production you had during your PhD, and to show that it could be really important for, especially for this position that may be related to business, or for public institutions, which are, at least in France, now more aware of the advantage of having such people in their team.
Thank you as well for the answer. And by the way, guys, so I will now enable you to unmute yourself. So if you want to also say, if you want to add anything, or if you want to say the question, follow-up question by voice, please do so. But please try to be a bit organized, since there are a lot of people now online. But for now, I'll just continue with textual questions. And if there are any other questions, please write them in text, or, as I said, speak them out loud. So the next question comes from Raquel. So he says, I wanted to know if there are any specific international certificates that you would suggest as beneficial for transitioning, like PMI certification for project managers, or is it mostly just on the job training that could you be most beneficial?
Yeah. So I told you I was I have a strong I had a strong involvement in EdTech and in all these technologies of education. But for the moment, by now, it's not sure. I'm not sure that recruiters are so sensitive to the different certifications you could have. As said, I think that it's really a matter of you showing that you have the mindset and that you got the different the main elements that may be mandatory for you to be to fit to the position, rather than having the certification. So of course, I think this is really interesting for you to go through different trainings that you can have. Sometimes you could be proud of showing that you went through different exams and you had some certifications, but sometimes you learn even more. In some trainings you may not have certification for, but where you can really interact with people and gather some information that may be very useful for the future. For instance, in this group of postdocs and PhD students we have at Pasteur, you have some people who took advantage of this lockdown in France to follow a lot of different trainings online based on business development, and have the feeling that it's not really the certification they had that is really important. It's really what they gain in terms of knowledge and skills, and eventually in mindset, that will be really important for them in the future. So in this line, I don't have many advice in terms of certification or different online courses you could go through. I would really encourage you to go through different type of courses, online courses, but on top of that, to talk to people and to see if you can also better understand what you've learned on these courses through a direct communication with the direct discussion with this type of people.
Thank you. I think it's also relatable to other domains of other industrial jobs as well. And then Shruvarthi Bhattacharjee wants to know, oh sorry, it's about the sharing presentation. So yeah, the presentation will be shared after the call webinar. So then I go to Ranjit Kumar. So I'd like to know if there is a possibility for a merger with a private organization related to the tech with a technology developed until pre-maturization stage. If yes, what will be the method for approaching identifying such an organization?
So if I reformulate the question, is that can you be recruited as a manager at this stage of prematuration, right? To this is it?
Yeah.
So yes, actually yes, because this is what I call the research engineer in the TTO phase, let's say. Because you have, for instance, you file a patent, you have the patent, but then at this stage, the technology is not mature enough either to go for licensing or to create a startup. And most of the time you need to develop the innovation a little bit to diminish the risk you can take if you create a startup, or to give more arguments for a company to buy the patent itself. So at this stage, usually they try to recruit someone who could work for a year or two in developing this project. And this is also the opportunity to find someone who could then be the one who will lead the project for the future. And so at least in France, you can find some opportunities in the tech transfer or SAT websites, but also on something that is called the Réseau Curie, like Marie Curie actually. And this network is a group of several TTOs and SAT in France, in which they developed a job platform to publicize together all the different positions you can find in TTOs in France.
Thank you. Actually, I just reread the question, and it's a very insightful answer you gave about the managerial position, but I think the question was actually a bit about the merger with the private organization, as in how to, I guess, merge with the organization if you have a startup before the prematurization stage. Is that also something that you can answer?
I didn't get the question, actually. Sorry.
so Rajit wants to know if there's a possibility for a merger with a private organization related to the tech, as in to join the companies, as I understand it. Is it correct, Ranit? Maybe you can correct me as well.
The manager to join the company at the prematuration phase?
Not the manager, but the merger to merge two companies together.
Oh, to merge at the prematuration phase? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, of course, and it often happens actually. Either, I mean, depending what you call merge, but if you have, let's say, two projects that are very similar and at the same phase of development, of course, it's very common to merge them, just because at the end, you just try to focus on the market opportunity you can create. And so if you have two projects that may target the same market and will be competitive together for the same market, there is no reason you would create these two projects separately. So either you merge them, or you push forward one project and you give up the other one. But of course, you could also incorporate the project you want to develop in an existing company, for instance, because especially for the tech transfer offices which have developed a spin-off strategy, meaning that they really have a strategy to create company that they really invest in developing in terms of human resources. For these tech transfer offices, it may be consistent to not create a new company, but to incorporate this project in an existing company they develop.
Okay, yeah, perfect, thanks. And then the next one is as follows. One of the best initiatives in active innovation in science is called IGEM. Maybe it would be a good option for much of the PhDs that are watching this presentation just now to promote this kind of initiative in their universities. Amazing experience also because they're planning to move to Paris. Okay, so it's not a question, but maybe you can have some comments about IGEM, Marc, as well, or do you not know about this?
I don't know about this, actually.
Okay, but let's move into Paris.
IGEM, this is it? Oh, yeah, okay, I see. Well, let's say it's maybe not the best, but it's really one great initiative that developed the creativity for students, and not specifically for PhD students and postdocs, but for students, and put them in a situation in which, on a very short-term basis, they need to create something and to develop all the aspects of the project. And so it really develops the team spirit for students, but also develop a lot of different skills in putting the different students in a situation in which they need to work with people with different disciplines, and to really try to understand what others are doing in a project. And so it's very intense. It's very quick, and yes, there will be. But I don't know the calendar of the project. There will be some initiatives coming out from Paris now, because it was centered in Boston until recently, but now they will also have some offices in Paris.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And could be useful for people based in France now. So next question is, have you had any pushbacks from academia in regards to the willingness to take the technology outside or its application? And if so, what was your approach in addressing this issue or encouraging the transition? So pushbacks from academia regards of people willing to take your technology outside of its primary application. And what was your approach to deal with such pushbacks, as in setbacks?
So do you mean, I don't get the pushback.
So as I understand the question correctly, maybe AH could correct me as well, if you're still here. So he or she is asking if you had any setbacks from academia, from academics, in regards to them willing to take the technology outside of its primary application. And if so, what was your approach to deal with such setbacks or pushbacks?
So the question is, if...
okay, sorry, AH just clarifies. So he or she says there was a willingness to publish more than apply the technology. If it makes more sense. AH, maybe you can also speak out loud your question.
So do you mean scientists want to publish more than really to develop the innovation? This was the...
That's correct. They're more willing to publish research than to actually try to apply it. Okay.
Well, it often happens actually, because scientists are evaluated on the amount of publications and not so much about patents or innovation they develop. So that's also why we, and when I say we, it's not just the Institut Pasteur, but it's a lot of different tech transfer offices now. We are trying to give more information and earlier than before about entrepreneurship and about innovation development. Then it always belongs to the scientist at the end, and if the scientist doesn't want to put any effort in trying to protect and in trying to create a company, it's still a matter of discussion between what we could find as a patent and what it could be required to do in the meantime. But then if a scientist continues to publish and doesn't want to go too much in patent development, then I mean it's very difficult for any institution to go against that.
Thank you. So then this is the end of the textual questions actually. So maybe somebody else wants to ask a question by voice. If so, I was curious about, so you say the network is important. I think we all know that, and I agree totally. But what is your background, what is your experience if people who are trying to balance between academia and industry, which side of the edge is more important in terms of network, academic network or industrial network for such a path as you're taking?
I would say it's both, but of course you're not doing the networking exactly the same way if you target an academic career or a career outside academia. For instance, I mean, I had when after my PhD and my postdoc, I had a profile to either go for an academic position or to go outside academia, and at the beginning of my PhD, I had no clues about anything about networking, and so I mean everything went through when came naturally almost, because you're in the lab, so you're talking to people in the lab, you're developing your academic network very naturally. And then since I was involved as a volunteer in associations that were connected to the ecosystem of innovation, well, I developed some network in the ecosystem of innovation. And so at the end, when I looked back 2-3 years after my PhD, I was thinking, well, I had the chance to develop this network very naturally without wondering too much how I was supposed to do, just because I was involved in on a daily basis to different actions that put me in contact with several different people. And I think that if you don't know what you want to do next, I mean, I think the best way is really to spend some time in meeting people in academia, but also outside academia. And then you don't have to make the choice now, but you need to make some key steps, at least 6 months or a year before the end of your contract, whatever if the next contract is still in academia or outside academia.
I agree. Thanks for your answer as well. So maybe there are some more questions also by voice, or if not, yeah, so if not, then I think it's maybe time to close the session. So thanks a lot, Marc, for your great talk and a lot of insights. I think we can all learn from that. So just to repeat, we will share the presentation of the webinar, and also the link to the recording will be in our YouTube channel of Marie Curie Association. As Marc said, it's good to be active in your such volunteer organization. So if you're not very active yet, it's a good chance for you as well. And stay tuned for future webinars. The next one will be quite shortly on June 30th. So I will also share some information about that in the follow-up email. So thanks a lot, Marc.
Thank you, Pavlo. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good rest of the day or evening.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.